So I'll call this meeting to order. Do we have any declaration of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Item number 3, business arising from the minutes. Item A, the motion by Councillor Soever. Councillor Soever, why don't we maybe put the motion on the floor? Would you like to move it, Councillor Soever? Yes, please. Okay, and I'm looking for a seconder. Councillor Bartnicki seconds. Councillor Soever, you have the floor.
This motion arises from the realization that I had during the last election when I started looking into how the municipality actually does its budget review. And the attention on most municipalities, and ours was the case as well, is the focus is on expenditures rather than revenue. So in looking at revenue, we started to recognize that our assessment was lagging behind. You could look at various development lands and they were still zoned, they were still assessed as individual parcels rather than lots, when in fact lots have been created and sold, and in some cases houses built and occupied, and yet on the tax rolls it was still showing as a single parcel. So you know, recognizing that a budget is made up of 2 parts, the revenue and the expenditures, we as a council started to focus on the revenue side, and actually we succeeded far beyond our wildest dreams. The target that our treasurer had set for supplementary assessment for this year was a little over $300,000. To date, we found over $900,000 of tax revenue in the supplementary for this year. Now, the disturbing part is that, as it says in the motion, that represents $317 million of missing assessment, but only $155 million is from this year. There's $123 million from the year before, and going back even further, there's $37 million from the year before that. And then there's no sense going further back because you can't legally collect those taxes anymore. So I think we've been successful in finding this, and this has been a benefit not only to the town, which benefits to the tune of about $928,000, but it also means an additional $880,000 of tax revenue to Grey County. So, but what this does is, if we find all our missing assessment and the other municipalities don't work as hard, then what happens is it just shifts more of the tax burden over to the town of Blue Mountains. And the only way to maximize the revenue to the entire county is to have everybody work with MPAC to do this. Now, I don't expect that many of the communities will find this much missing supplementary, because we know that 40% of the growth in Grey County is happening in the town of Blue Mountains. So as things move through the development cycle and houses get occupied, there's going to be far more of that in the town of Blue Mountains. But the purpose of this motion is to encourage everybody, all the lower tiers, to go out and work with MPAC, because they will work with you. Now, there are challenges. If you look at, it sounds like we pay a lot to MPAC, which is $1.8 million a year is the county bill to MPAC. But when you break that down per property, that's only $32 per property. So it's not a lot. So every 4 years, MPAC has $128 to look at each property in the county. So they are understaffed and underfunded, but they will work extremely hard with you to find your missing assessment. And when you do find it, it's a boon not only to your local lower tier municipality, but it's also a boon to county here, because you know, 880,000, that's almost $1 million, and I think we'll be north of $1 million by the time we're done this year. And county, I think, I can't remember the number, but I think it was about 638 was the projection for supplementary for this year. So we'll exceed that just by working in the town of Blue Mountains. If everybody else were to pitch in, I dare say we could do a lot better. And I think this will have a very positive effect for all taxpayers in the county, in that if we find all the assessment then that affects the mill rate. For everybody who's not properly assessed and is underassessed, that means somebody else is paying more in taxes because their tax rate is too high. So that's why I'm bringing this motion, and I think, you know, it behooves all of us to try to maximize the revenue to Grey County, and so that we can provide the lowest possible tax rate to all our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swever. Any others? Councillor Bartnicki.
I think I'm on. This also impacts the school boards. I want to point out that from our reassessment of supplementary, $400,000 a year from here on is added to what they were getting because of this process of recapturing this. We're also very well aware of cutbacks that are coming our way from the province. I can't remember the exact figure that was brought to us just a short time ago, but if we were all to capture this missing assessment, we may be able to keep service levels the way they are, to expand programs and provide a better level of service to all the citizens of Grey County. Not to mention what can happen if you have growth in your area. I will tell you that I did ask this question. There were a number of our citizens who have not received accurate tax bills, and some not at all for 3 years. We had surprisingly only a couple who came and had any form of complaint, and they were resolved quite quickly. My next door neighbor is one of those people. He was smart enough to keep saying, I don't get a tax bill, and I keep saying, well, here's how much ours is, start putting it away. We haven't had a lot of flashback on this, so for us, we see it as a positive. We see it as a positive for the whole of Grey County. It's a lot of missing assessment, and we definitely see it for the school boards too. We'll be dealing with our school boards to encourage them to consider building a school in the town of Blue Mountains. They don't even have land there at the current time, and with all the new growth and new population, they're going to be challenged in that way too to secure land. So there are many benefits to this, and I hope that you will be encouraged. I think that is the word in Councillor Soever's motion. Be encouraged to do this because it is the fair and equitable thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartnicki. Are there any other comments? Councillor Body.
Thank you, Warden Hicks. I asked our staff, our city manager, first of all, used to be our director of corporate services, and he does the accounting side, and then Kate Allen is now our corporate services director. So I was asking both of them about this. They weren't surprised that it had fallen behind that far in the town of Blue Mountains because of all the growth there. They're diligent all the time trying to make sure, because it benefits us first in the lower tier more than the county. So they're on top of this as much as possible, and as a new home gets finished, then they'll contact MPAC immediately. So I don't think we're going to find much additional money in the city of Owen Sound, because we do try and be diligent with them all the time, and we don't have that same volume where they've fallen behind and needed to put extra work on. I agree that all of us need to be diligent all the time with MPAC to try and make sure that we're getting as much of our taxes as we can, but I don't think that for our municipality that we're going to see any found money or much found money, if because we're kind of doing it all the time. But that's my thoughts.
Councillor McQueen.
It does move. Just to add to that, I think also it's also important that you also have your building department following up on the status or the current of building permits, and they're moving along in their status, because if some are hit final occupancy or even occupancy, that changes the tax. So that information has to get sent in. So I know from conversations in the past, that's very important, because that sort of puts that new status. So there's a building permit, but if there's no updated status, then it's left behind. So I know that's something that we have worked in the past to make sure that data is fairly current. So, thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Well, I will be supporting this this motion. I too inquired of our West Grade Director of Finance and Treasurer, and I was absolutely encouraged that we actively look at our building permits and ensure that they're recorded so that this type of assessment can be applied. As we are growing our building department currently with the partnership with Chatsworth, we will certainly look at efficiencies to ensure that the new builds and the information that Impact needs is given to them in a timely basis to ensure that this assessment can be applied.
Thank you. I don't see any, oh, Councillor Soever.
I'm very pleased that, the other municipalities are doing it already, and I recognize also that, Owen Sound with less development it isn't going to find as much, but, the idea is just to get everybody up to date. And the other aspect is occupancy is one thing, but as lands move through various stages of the development process, they are supposed to be reassessed as the value increases. Like when they get final site plan approval, then the value of that land changes and they should be reassessed. And I think in some cases in the town of Blue Mountains, that wasn't happening. So it's understandable. It is a collaborative effort between the town staff and MPAC, and realizing that MPAC doesn't have, they only have 4 assessors for all of Grey County, 57,000 properties. So it's not an easy job, but this motion is designed to encourage and just highlight this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Soever. I don't see, Councillor McQueen.
Not to belabor it, but another aspect of assessment or proper taxes being paid, and I'm sure those around the community, around the horseshoe that farm, how many times has there been that tax rebate signed on a piece of property that farmer no longer has it and it's not being farmed? There's some of that, and there's no follow-up from the province. And I've raised this where they don't, unless there's a change of ownership, it usually doesn't trigger that needs to be re-evaluated as far as being farmed. And there's times where the property owner is enjoying that 25%, 24%, whatever it is, rate, but it's not being farmed anymore, or it's growing up in wild, or it hasn't been re-evaluated. So there is that aspect, but that's a provincial part that maybe we need to have that conversation also.
Thank you. I see no further discussion, therefore I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Are there any opposed? That is carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 3B, we have a motion by Councillor McQueen. Councillor McQueen, would you like to move? And seconded by Councillor Robinson. Councillor McQueen, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Warden and County Council, and I'm hoping that everybody will support this notice of motion for the planning staff to bring back some documents or some discussion papers. Certainly, we know that, well, from a Grey Highlands perspective, we have had a public meeting and we're moving forward to reducing the minimum size of a home to not having 90 square meters, which it is in Grey Highlands. So we're moving toward reducing that minimum size. I know a couple years back, at the pleasure of Meafort, they had, was it a tiny home summit? I think that's what it was, Barb?
Sustainable housing.
And that was 2 years ago, I think now, which was really thought-provoking. And at that time, the question was raised, well, how come you can't build under 1,000 square feet or that 90 square meters? Well, it's because it's in there. But the building code, I think it was a building official from the town of Blue Mountain, said you can build smaller homes. You just need to change the planning process to make that happen. So this is that first step of looking at creating policy to have the opportunity for those to have affordable or attainable homes, as it says in the notice of motion. Also looking at the opportunity to create maybe smaller severances, or creating an opportunity to add smaller units, multiple units on a particular property. Certainly you need planning policy, you also need zoning in place to sort of follow that. So we just need some of those, I guess you call it framework to move forward. Certainly we know that we have a huge issue with labor issues, especially in the Blue Mountains and all through Grey Highlands. I know with regard to Chapman's as an employer. So if we can create some of those opportunities to create an attainable home or a smaller home to maybe be that first time home buyer, then I think that creates that opportunity to get employment, to move forward and start that journey as far as in home ownership. Along with on the other side of the spectrum is there's also seniors, seniors that are on fixed income, still are active seniors, but they still like that home ownership. They want to downsize. I know that there are some places like in Meaford and I think Walkerton outside of Grey County, but other areas in Grey County also that have the ability for seniors to purchase smaller units or whatever. But sometimes from affordability standpoint, they don't need a lot, but we just need to create those opportunities. And also there has been conversation with regards to quality home, and it has come back that quality home can build a 600 square foot unit. So there you go. They're ready to go too. So we just need to work forward, move forward with creating. One is a discussion, but certainly that will come back through if this notice of motion is supported, to bring back some policies and what that needs to be with regards to moving forward. I guess my question, 2 points. Well, one of the questions would be is, do we need, if it does mean changes to the county's official plan or our local official plan, which you have to do a housekeeping, but is this drastically changing our official plan? If there are items in there, does it need to get provincial approval? Is it housekeeping? Where in that sense of the process? We know we just went through our county's official plan, and we did have to get the blessing of the province. I don't feel that the province wouldn't bless the idea of looking for attainable homes, but I guess there's that process that we need. And also, I think when we did go through that exercise for doing our Grey County official plan, we really involved the public, the stakeholders in that. And I just think that maybe that's a decision that when this report comes back, that we have further discussion of opening it up and getting some feedback from those out there, that whether it's developers, whether it's landowners, whether it's the public. I think it's good. I think it's a good opportunity to try to bring that positive thing moving forward. And we know also with some of the municipalities have passed with regards to climate change and crisis and emergency, certainly lesser input, your climate, your carbon footprint. Also, smaller homes maybe is that opportunity for people to do that, along with we talk about net zero homes, where they have a no carbon footprint. So there's a lot of, I think we're at that cusp of some great things to happen here in Grey County, and I think this is that first step of us moving forward to be leaders, and also creating some ideas and some possibilities for some new attainable and affordable homes. Last comment is with regards to that is, in conversation with the province, I think the province would be quite willing to be partnering with us. I think they're very engaged. I know some of the conversations that happen at AMO, certainly we could be leaders in the sense of the province eyes, and maybe getting some funding, or maybe there would be funding available to create some pilot projects and all that kind of stuff. So let's get on the bandwagon, and I don't want to call it bandwagon, let's get on that new initiative of moving forward, and let's get her done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McQueen. I'll come to you in just one sec. You mentioned quality homes can build a 6 foot, a 600. I thought I heard 6 feet. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. As seconder of the motion, I just wanted to identify that certainly there is a demand for different types of housing in Grey County with respect to attainable, affordable, tiny homes, small lot developments. We know that there are solutions out there that can assist our current residents and our future residents. And I'm just reminding County Council that we have received various delegations here around the horseshoe from agencies that have identified barriers to employment. And one of those barriers, each and every time that we've received those delegations, has identified that housing or affordable housing is a barrier. So I think this is one step forward. We're getting what I hope is ahead of the issue with regard to the reports and the discussion, and let's see where we can achieve removing one of these barriers to employment.
Thank you. Any other remarks? Councillor Soever.
Yes, I think this is a good suggestion, and when I was at the Ontario Home Builders Association dinner, I sat next to a gentleman who was building houses in St. Thomas, Ontario, and they're doing exactly that. They've changed some of their policies, because what they have is they have a campus-style arrangement with a 3-story apartment in the front with dormitory style with common areas, and it's meant to transition people out of shelters. And so that because each person has their own living quarters, but there are common areas and kitchens, that there is a sense of community and support there for the people. And then behind that, they do have a campus of tiny homes, in which are 600 to 400 square feet. Now, 400 is doable. I know my nephew has a 400 square foot condo in Toronto, but when the family shows up, it is a little crowded. We're not all small people, but the 600, when you look at that, it is possible, and we do need to focus more on that. We just had a house built in the town of Blue Mountains, which is 9,300 square feet, so that would accommodate 15 of the 600 square foot ones.
Thank you. Any other remarks? Councillor Bartnicki.
I think we're all very cognizant of the need for homes for younger families and for people entering the housing market, reasonable rentals to support our labor force. Let's not forget about the people who are challenged with independent living, and make sure that when we move forward, that we do consider the percentage of need in that area. I think that people who are physically and intellectually challenged are often forgotten in this. And when we talk about smalls, the tiny homes, that is an area that really impacts this particular population. Many of them need assistive devices that will not work in the small hallways that some of those units have. I too have a relative living in a 540 square foot condo in Toronto. There's a building at King and Bay, and it has 1,300 such units, and it's pretty nice in there. But you would really have a hard time in my daughter's unit to use a walker or wheelchair. There are units on the ground floor that have been set aside, and I can't remember the percentage, but it is part of the action in the GTA to make sure we're accommodating people with special needs.
Thank you, Councillor Bartnicki. I think we're ready for, Councillor Body.
Sorry, maybe late to the game. I think I've got a question for Mr. Schertzer. We just did the official plan. Are we not flexible enough already to deal with these things, or is this absolutely necessary? I'm surprised that we wouldn't have covered it when we just did the plan over the last year or so. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions and comments. I think this council's already taken some really positive first steps and maybe even second steps in terms of implementing policies in both the new official plan as well as the community improvement plan program in order to encourage and provide incentives for this affordable, attainable housing. In the new official plan, there's definitely policies in there that provide that flexibility, encourages municipalities to amend their zoning bylaws to remove that unit size. We have tiny home policies in there. We have policies with respect to seniors and age-friendly housing. So I think what this report will likely do, if council wants us to bring forward the report, is highlight already some of the existing policies in the new official plan, highlight some of the already good work with the CIP program. Some municipalities, including Grey Highlands, has already adopted a new CIP that provides some of those new incentives. And we can also highlight some of the next steps in terms of what are the next steps. Some of those would be making changes to local official plans. With that, based on Councillor McQueen's question, that doesn't require provincial approval. Even if there was any changes to our new official plan, that's this council approves those changes. For the local official plans, the county is the approval authority for those, so it doesn't require provincial approval either. And for zoning amendment changes, that's local councils. They can make those changes at any time. We're more than happy to highlight some of those policies that are in our new official plan that we think will provide that flexible environment to encourage more affordable and attainable housing, and talk about some of those next steps to implement those CIPs, the community improvement plans. We think that is where we're going to see some more traction by providing incentives to developers to be able to create more affordable and attainable housing, to lower their bottom line, so to speak, to be able to create some of these units at an affordable level. That's where we're going to see the traction, and so we're more than happy to work with municipalities. We work with Grey Highlands to implement those. We know that there's other municipalities like West Grey, Southgate that are Southgate I think just adopted their draft community improvement plan the other day. So we're very excited, and we think that's the path forward. And we're more than happy to highlight that all in a report. But I think this council needs to be congratulated and applauded for already the steps they've taken to move forward with this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Schertzer. CAO Wingrove.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. And just to follow up on Randy's point, I think if there's a piece of work that we could undertake now to move forward, and maybe we need to get a little bit further into the winter time. I know building is pretty much a 12-month of the year task these days, but some further consultation with the development community, with the builders, perhaps an opportunity for some follow-up and further education about the changes that have been made, and to get some feedback from them about now that this is in place, how does it sit with you? Do you see yourself moving forward to this? Are there other things that we should be considering or looking at? But I think the development community is a critical piece in this process, and to talk directly to them and to understand their perspective, I think would be some useful information to bring back to this table.
Thank you. So I think, Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, County Council, and just some closing remarks. And thank you for all the comments, and Randy for your clarity on that. I know for Grey Highlands we've had secondary units in place for 5 years. People are just still finding out about them. And I know that there's conversation about removing DC charges on those secondary units at the county level. I know we provided clarity at our local level, and we don't have those DC charges on those secondary units in our municipality. But some of the things I sort of was hoping to sort of tease out of this report, and thanks very much for the explanation of some of the initiatives that we do have in our current official plan, is there an opportunity to create smaller severances for smaller homes? Because right now the minimum size is 2 acres. Could you create a 1 acre with your zoning capitalizing that the maximum size of that footprint of a house can only be so much, so for your septic and all that stuff. So a 2 acre lot, you can probably build a 10,000 square foot house. But if it's a smaller size lot, then there's limitations on that size that that house could be. The other thing is the ability to add 4 600 square foot units, which is 24 square feet, is still an average size home in some places, 2,400 square feet. So then how do you do that? And is that a commonality type thing, or like, is it a common ownership and all that kind of stuff? Also with Bill 108, then we've talked about it in Grey Highlands of talking about reintroducing or rediscussing or looking at a new development charge plan to maybe remove development charges on a certain size home, period. Say it's 700 square feet or under, there's no development charge. I mean, the biggest problem we've seen with developers creating attainable homes is there needs to be incentives for them to do it. And because if you can go out and build a subdivision with big homes and make all kinds of money, where's the incentive? Because the incentive there's a demand for larger homes. So we need to create those incentives. So certainly through the opportunities through Bill 108 and re-entering into that new DC charge plan is you can do some things there. And I think we as the county have talked about maybe reintroducing or looking at our DC charge to remove it on the secondary units. I think we need to have that bigger conversation is if we want to really create an incentive on attainable homes, maybe permanently remove under a certain size. Or if it's 4 units on a property, maybe it's divided 4 ways at DC charge. So it's not, so if it's say it was $4,000, then instead of charging $4,000 per unit, it's $1,000 per unit because it's 4 in one lot. So I think there's lots of ways we can create some real initiatives in the sense of moving forward, maybe achieving, because I know the question around DC charges is there's still the use on the infrastructure. So you still have to balance that out. But maybe there's ways of working through that and creating that opportunity. So, thank you.
Councillor Keaveney. Councillor Keaveney, could you just push your button?
Thought I did. I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought I had it. Okay, so I'll go back then. Thinking of your points, Ms. Wingrove, in terms of reaching out to the development community, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity as well to support our lower tiers and the Grey County in terms of really assessing the need. I mean, we know there's need, but is there need for rentals? Is there need for home ownership? Thinking of the work of the Southern Georgia Bay Workforce Task Force and the report that came back from them and the assessments they did in terms of rental units and what people could afford to pay and so on, and that's a couple of years ago. Those figures need to be adjusted now. I'm wondering about the potential of a survey to really reach out and understand what it is that people want in relation to our unemployment. And we know Chapman's needs 300 employees, we know the Mountain needs 600, and how do we relate that knowledge to the need for housing, and how do we sort of dig deeper to make sure that when we go to the development community that they're building what it is that people want and what we really need here in Grey County.
I think there was some interesting work that was reported on in the Toronto Star recently where they were talking about the absolute dearth of any new rentals being developed in the city of Toronto. And they talked about the advantages of moving forward with a condo development versus what it's like to try and develop rental property. So again, I think there's some learning and some understanding that we can benefit from here to understand what it is that they're up against when it comes to that and what's driving some of the decisions that we see them making. From that, perhaps we can understand better what interventions we would have at our disposal that might be helpful. But to your point, Councillor Keaveney, just to understand that what that market depth is, what the need is certainly something that we could take a look at as well.
Thank you. I see no further hands. We've had very good discussion, and I think lots of information to staff about what topics might be included in the report if we vote to receive such a report. So on that point, then, I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Are there any opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. How are people feeling? Can we proceed on to the delegations, or is anyone feeling like they need a break? I think we can proceed on. I'm seeing nods. Yes? Okay. Then we have a delegation from the Community Drug and Alcohol Strategy. Is Allison?
Yes,
Allison Clark. Is Ian here? Corey?
Everybody's present.
They're all present. I know Councillor Mackey is a member of that body. Who's the other councillor? Councillor Desai. Alison, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Warden Hicks, County Councillors, thanks for having us here today. My name is Alison Govier. I'm the coordinator of the Community Drug and Alcohol Strategy, formerly the Grievers Task Force on Crystal Meth, as you might remember. As you're aware, we receive funding from Grey County and Bruce County, and my position is hosted at the Canadian Mental Health Association in Grey Bruce. I'm joined by 3 of my colleagues today, and the purpose of our deputation is to provide an update on our work. I'd like to start the presentation by introducing Corey Fair. Corey is a member of the Community Drug and Alcohol Strategy and has recent experience with opioid addiction. He's been working closely with our opioid working group to help increase awareness about the realities of addiction and recovery. I've invited Corey to share a few words with you today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Corey Fair, and I am a recovering opiate addict. I live in Wyerton, where I do personal training and life coaching. In February 2013, my wife at the time and our 2 kids were living on base in Petawawa. I was part of the military unit 1RCR. One day I was working on top of a LAV, light armored vehicle. When I was lifting part of the main gun, something popped in my back and I experienced some of the worst pain I've ever felt. That was the first domino to fall in a chain of events that led to several very dark years. After having x-rays done and an examination, I was told I had spondylolisthesis at my L4 and L5 vertebrae. My injury did not heal up and I've suffered from chronic pain ever since. My constant pain turned me into a very miserable person, and unfortunately I took it out on the ones closest to me. My wife left me and took her kids in April of 2014. I stayed in Petawawa and finished my contract in June 2014 and then moved home. That's when I was prescribed pain pills and started working for Gardaworld. July 2015, my back pain got so intense I had to stop working. That's when the depression and anxiety got really bad. I chose to deal with my mental health by getting high on my pain pills, which only made things worse. In February 2016, I had a spinal fusion and my surgeon sent me home with 400 oxys. That's when addiction took over my life. The drugs caused me extreme depression and anxiety. Because of this, I isolated myself and became suicidal at times. I was ashamed of my situation and didn't reach out for help because of the stigma attached to mental health and addiction. I was scared of being judged. August 11th, 2018, I finally had enough of wasting my life and reached out for help. I knew deep down inside that I had huge potential and was sick of wasting it. Since that day, I have committed my life to recovery and personal development. I've taken advantage of a lot at Canadian Mental Health Association. I've done the CATS program, Community Addiction Treatment Services, DBT, Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, RAP, Wellness Recovery Action Plan, ASSIST, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, Mental Health First Aid, and Counseling. I've been doing my own peer support and working with the opioid working group for a while now. When I got clean, I saw the opportunity to help make a positive impact in this community on something much bigger than myself. I want my life experience to help make a difference. The most important thing I want everyone here to know is that addiction does not discriminate. What happened to me could easily happen to any one of you. Guaranteed someone close to you is struggling with mental health and/or substance abuse. I encourage everyone to learn about addiction and have some compassion for those of us who struggle. Thanks.
Thank you, Corey. I just need to know how to advance the slides. Good, thank you.
Press there.
Press, okay, very good. Thanks, Corey. That's a very compelling story, and I think it points out that in order to deal with addiction, we need to see it for what it is. It is a health issue. It is a response to pain. What it is not is a moral failing. It also is, I think, a complex social issue. It brings people in contact with the justice system. It can bring them in contact with the social system, social service system, as well as the health system. And if we are going to deal with it effectively, we have to provide a coordinated and compassionate response. No one organization or agency can address the issue effectively alone. So in order to or to give us an idea of how we, with the drug and alcohol strategy, are doing that, I'll turn it over to Allison.
Thank you, Clark. So as Clark mentioned, we believe that this is a shared responsibility. The community drug and alcohol strategy is made up of service providers and community members across both the counties. Our vision is improved health and well-being for individuals, families, communities in Grey and Bruce counties by reducing the harms related to substance use. Our leadership table and working groups include partners in health, policing, housing, education, harm reduction, treatment, youth services, and beyond. We're also part of a provincial network of drug strategies who share information and collaborate on special projects. We recently launched a website and our first strategic plan. So we're putting the pieces in place to increase visibility and reach of our work. You can find us online at www.drugstrategy.org. So I'd like to make a correction to the slide. It's not .ca, and I apologize if you've already tried the .ca and gotten nowhere. So in our strategic plan, we identify some of the challenges that we face as a community. For example, if we look at the healthcare data, we see that substance-related ER visits are on the rise, both locally and provincially, and half of these ER visits involve alcohol. According to the Canadian Community Health Survey, Grey Bruce residents are more likely to be regular heavy drinkers than Ontarians. We encourage I've lost my notes. Okay, that's all right. We understand that communities tend to underestimate the harms related to alcohol, and that we also tend to underestimate the impacts on community. So I think it's important that councillors adopt a comprehensive public health approach when considering municipal alcohol policy, one that supports a culture of safety and moderation. Other areas that require our attention are drug-impaired driving in the context of cannabis legalization and the escalating public health crisis of opioid addiction and overdose. As Corey highlighted, underlying these problems are less visible and deeply ingrained attitudes and behaviors that we have towards people who use substances or suffer from drug addiction. And this moralized view of addiction perpetuates stigma, marginalization, and health inequity. So the role of our group is to work at a system level to change policies, practices, and resource flow, while simultaneously addressing the mental models and power dynamics that hold these problems in place. As a group, we build unified services and systems. We help to strengthen the voices of people who are less heard in the system. And we champion solutions that fit with our rural context. I've invited my colleague, Ian Reich, Harm Reduction Manager at Grey Bruce Public Health, to provide an example of these roles in action.
Thank you very much for the time, Council. I am the chair of the Opioid Working Group as well as the manager of the Harm Reduction Program, as Alison mentioned. This image here is just a representation of the coordination that we do have in place at the health unit of members on the Opioid Working Group and how we are working together. We have membership from police enforcement, from various agencies, EMS providers, fire, school boards are at the table as well. All of our First Nations communities, as well as SOHAC, our housing partners as well are at the table, and countless others at the table. This is a very small representation of those that are there. This slide here just puts in context what we are dealing with in terms of the opioid situation that is happening here in Ontario, in Canada, but it is happening throughout the world as well. And it's not to take away any of the severity of the issues that are on the slide here. It's just to show a representation of the amount of people that are losing their lives related to this. And you'll see the year here is, this is from 2017. So we have 2 more years to add to the slide. They just won't fit. We continue to see the rate of death remain the same and not improve. To show a graphical representation here in Ontario, you see a sharp upward trend from 2015 onward. That could be a slight artifact due to better reporting, but that doesn't account for nearly any of this. The deaths attributed to overdose in particular are related to the fentanyl and carfentanil that are on the streets mixed into the current street supply of drugs. There have always been deaths related to heroin use, however, not like this. People are taking drugs that are killing them without being aware or without wanting it done to them. There was a story last Christmas of a lawyer out partying on the town in Toronto. He died taking cocaine, but he died of a fentanyl overdose. No one should ever have that happen to them, and that's what we're dealing with on a regular basis. And because we're small and rural, we're not out of the woods here. Our rate of overdose death is the exact same as the Southwest LHIN. It's virtually identical to that of Ontario as well. It is here, and it's been here for quite some time. Our work is, again, as our partners have mentioned, to decrease that stigma, to make people feel comfortable with accessing help. And what we do at the health unit is around harm reduction. It's about making sure that that person has another day and giving them access to that help when they are ready to receive it. We know from people that suffer from alcohol addiction and any other forms of addiction, if you're not ready for help, it's not going to help to force someone into that help. They need to be ready and to see it, and that's what we do. We have open door policy, and we'll always make sure that we provide referrals to services available to the community members here. Directly in the opioid working group, we do coordinate an opioid response plan that we're prepared to finalize. We do have a very original overdose monitoring system that's was the first of its kind in Ontario, where through the support of actually Grey County EMS, Kevin McNabb has been vital in making this process move forward. As soon as an ambulance responds and charts a call relating to an opioid overdose, we get an automatic email notification of those overdoses. And as a opioid working group, we've come up with triggers to then send out alerts to our community partners. We offer needle exchange programs and naloxone distribution. And if you notice that upward trend of overdoses that I showed a few graphs ago, naloxone started to be dispensed in 2015. Overdoses have increased. The rate of death, specifically here in Grey Bruce, has not changed much. It has stayed relatively the same. Naloxone is definitely a big key player in the reason why people are not dying at the level. We have self-reported people that have admitted to us, 108 of them in 2008 alone used naloxone to save their life. That number of 7 deaths in 2018 could have been a lot higher. It could have been in the hundreds if it weren't for this medication. We are working with the county to develop a tabletop exercise specific to a mass opioid overdose within the county as well, to see where there are weaknesses within our systems, as well as opioid awareness and engagement sessions that we are planning throughout Grey and Bruce counties. The first is next week in Owen Sound here, where we invite everyone in the public that is interested to come and ask questions directly to public health, to police, to EMS, and our mental health and addictions providers. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're available to take questions.
So thank you very much for that presentation. And Corey, especially, I want to reach out and give you a big hug, brother. I think you speak for many, and your point is absolutely correct. Not a single person in this room can say that they're not in some way touched or affected by either addiction or mental health. So you're doing a great service telling your story, and I really thank you for doing that and reminding us that it can happen to any of us. Thank you. Questions, Councillor? Any questions around the table? Any commentary? Councillor Desai, did you have anything to add? You're a member of the committee.
There we go. No, I think it was a great presentation. It's a really good community that really strives to make a difference in the community, and it's really eye-opening to be a part of it. You know, coming from a background where I haven't had to deal with many issues that we hear about, it's really eye-opening, and I'd invite council members around the table to come to one of the meetings to see what we're all about.
Thank you. Councillor Milne?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. In relation to the overdoses related to carfentanil being cut into the street drugs, is it a possibility of some kind of, I don't know, screening material that you could put on the drug that would allow the carfentanil to show up in there? Is that something that is done or can be done?
There are definitely drug testing equipment out there. Their sensitivity is quite weak. So the challenges we face is fentanyl comes in many different forms, especially the way it's getting mixed in the street drugs. There's small laboratories that are able to make this on the black market. Chemically slightly different. So when you test a drug, it may test as safe, that there's no fentanyl in it, when in fact, because of the low sensitivity, there is fentanyl in it. So the potential risk of doing something like that would be giving someone a false sense of security, and the concern would be that they would pass away because of feeling that their drugs did not contain fentanyl, when in fact maybe there was carfentanil in it, or an analog similar to it. So it is definitely a strategy we want to continue to investigate, but until the street testing kits that are available are more sensitive, it will be a challenge. No problem.
Councillor McQueen.
Well, thank you. And there's been some mention that you control, similar to cannabis, you control the product by legalizing it or having it that you can buy the product through a proper means. Is that another solution in the sense of controlling the product that people are taking, getting away from it being a street drug or a black market drug, where you're controlling the product from the point that the people that are taking it know it's safe?
100%. There's definitely a lot of literature and experience within different countries about the fact that providing a safe pharmaceutical grade supply of street drugs like heroin to people that do struggle with addiction saves lives, but it also, every time they interact with someone receiving those safe drugs, they have an opportunity then for help. They have information available to them for help. I think in the countries that it has been successful, they have a mental health system that can react very quickly to the needs of individuals on a real-time basis. And I think that's where what we're striving to do, is to ensure that if they do get those street drugs, or drugs are decriminalized and possession is safe, and there's safe supply, similar to the safe supply of cannabis or alcohol, we need to ensure that when they're ready for help, they get it that day. And it's a challenge. But I think just seeing all of us together here, that's a challenge that we're striving towards. So if you can see a long-term goal as having no one die and having immediate access to the help when they need it, when they want it, and be sympathetic to those individuals and wait for them to be ready. The readiness assessment is key and vital in this. People just tend not to succeed unless they are truly ready.
Okay, so I don't see any other hands, so thank you again very much for taking the time and coming to educate us. There were some very good points. I saw the staff taking notes. So once again, thank you. Council, I think we will take a short break and then reconvene. I'm looking at the consent agenda at item 6. Is there anything there requires separate discussion? Councillor Soever?
Just a minor.
Okay, then I'm looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda as items as presented. Moved by Councillor Burley, seconded by Councillor McQueen. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 7A. Anne-Marie, you're on deck. We're dealing with the 10-year housing and homelessness plan update. Very appropriate for today. I'm going to look for a mover to put the item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Milne, seconded by Councillor Robinson. Anne-Marie, you have the floor.
Thank you. So the 10-year housing and homelessness plan started in 2014. Every service manager in Ontario is required to have one. At the 5-year mark, we're also required to have a relook at the plan. We had actually been looking at it every year because we know that things change in our area all the time when it comes to housing and needs. But we wanted to do an official look and an official public consultation in order to get some ideas of where we want to go for the next 5 years. Let me see if I get this. I'm just going to follow along on here. I'll just get to some of the points. So what is the plan? Basically, our plan is pretty simple. Our vision is we want everyone to have access to affordable housing and access to supports to remain housed. Pretty simple idea, but in theory, not as simple. But that's certainly something that we are looking at as being our main theme throughout this plan. I wanted to talk a little bit with council about defining affordable housing. It's always very difficult when we throw around terms like community housing, affordable housing, attainable housing, and who are the people that we're trying to serve through this plan, and what is our mandate as Grey County Housing. So the province has a number of definitions about what affordable housing is, and so does CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So their definition states that it should not exceed 30% of someone's annual gross income. So if we have a senior living with us and they are bringing in $1,000 a month, then their rent with us is $300. So that's sort of where we looked at that. Now, if you look at the grand scheme of affordable housing and that definition of 80% of market rent, so that could be 80% of market rent is affordable, but then it also is that 80% and below. So the people that we're dealing with are in that high core need for housing. So they may be able to afford 30% of what a market rent is. So for instance, our average senior does probably pay around $400 a month with us, and here an 80% rent would probably be around that $600 mark. And these are numbers that we received from CMHC stating that a one-bedroom average would be about $767. We would know probably about an average one-bedroom right now in Grey County is about $900. So that's where we're looking at that definition. So we're dealing with people that really are in that, in order to afford a one-bedroom apartment at $600 would have to be making around that $26,000 and less. The average person living in our housing makes about $17,000 a year. So this is the housing that we're looking at. So another thing to throw out there is that the province stopped funding RGI housing in the 80s. So there were no more rent geared to income housing built since the 80s. That is the stock that we have. Those 997 units that we own are all rent geared to income. So these are those 30%. So they're a very, very deep subsidy. So people are only paying maybe $150, $139 a month. Maybe they're paying, up to about $400, $500 a month, and that's it. But the program that they have put out since, starting in 2008, the province has provided some funding to build affordable housing, and that is looking at that 80% of market rent according to what CMHC says is market rent for the area. So right now, if you'll notice in that bottom paragraph, CMHC states that Grey County, a one-bedroom, is about $767. So the maximum rent that we would be able to pay would be around that $600 rent. So you're still looking at that person that's making under $26,000 a year. So as Grey County Housing, that is that group that we look and strive to build housing for. We have a wait list of about 600 Grey County residents that are looking for that housing. Now, for often, we will make an offer of housing out there, and for some reason, they may turn it down. And so, you know, if we were to build 600, would we need 600? Probably. But that is that line that we're looking at. So we tend to have people from out of the area that apply to our list also. We're seeing that more and more simply because there is a need in the Toronto, the York, the Hamiltons. They're looking at a 10 to 15 year wait list. So that inaccessible and inaffordability or unaffordability is stretching out and pushing people out into the outer skirts. So we are getting more and more people from outside Grey County come onto our wait list. In saying that, often we'll make an offer of housing to someone and they don't take it because, you know, maybe they're doing okay where they are right now and they really don't want to leave the area. So that is something that has skewed our wait list a little bit for us to be able to determine exactly how many units we need. So what we're doing is we're looking at, we have 600 Grey County residents that we know want housing, give or take that 15 to 20% that may not be ready for it at the time. We're hoping that kind of be that buffer for that one or two people or whoever that might take that housing from the outskirts. A little bit confusing, I know, but that's the best data that we have to go on right now. The province has actually just announced some regulations that will probably give us a little bit more control over our wait list to have some better data, and I'll be coming with a report for that at a later date. So just wanting to define who it is that we are providing housing for. My report talks a little bit about some of the trends that we're seeing in affordable housing too. The fact that we all know the vacancy is very low, that housing costs are going up, and that anytime we see housing or vacancy needs going lower, our wait list gets higher too because there's less and less housing available out there. I did put a chart in there too, just talking about some of the who it is that's looking for emergency housing, our households that are earning under 21,200, our households that are earning just above that, and that's sort of the housing that I think we were talking about earlier. You know, the households that are earning less than that $30 an hour, and that are having problems, that are employed or want to be employed in the area, but maybe don't have. Can't find housing. And that would be your attainable housing. That's the housing that you're looking for possibly building. And I think through our CIP program and all of the ideas that we talked about earlier in council, that's exactly where you're going to find the housing for that niche through developers developing the multi residential units, through townhouses, semi. Getting that housing out there, I think that's where you're going to find solutions for housing for that niche. So we did do a lot of consultation with our partners. We did focus groups, we did community consultations. We spoke with people with lived experience. We spoke to our tenants. You've experienced going through our housing system, what needs to change, how can we help? We did joint strategic planning with Canadian Mental Health Association, the hospital, Grey County and Bruce County. And we've been doing ongoing consultation sessions with our poverty task force. So this is where we gained our information, and we did this over a long period of time. I had a lot of staff in my department that helped out with a lot of these consultation sessions and had a big role to play in pulling all of this information together. What we heard the need for more stock, number one, and maintaining the existing stock that we have. And number two that we heard was more mental health supports. More supports in general, but the number one thing that came through loud and clear was that we recognize that there are increasing number of people out there that are not maintaining the housing that they have because they need some support. So how do we get them the supports? And we see that in our own housing too. The need for some diverse supports, so maybe that is VON, maybe that's Meals on Wheels, maybe it's social supports, maybe it's mental health addictions, rent supplements, so that when there is a vacancy that does come available in the community, that those that are in the lower income bracket have and can have the ability to compete with someone not in the lower income bracket for that housing. So for instance, maybe a $300 subsidy to that landlord to make it affordable. More awareness of issues of poverty, food insecurity, and unstable housing, and incentives, again, for that private developer to build more types of housing. And also looking at culturally appropriate housing services. So we also were able to identify some of the vulnerable groups that live in Grey County, and I'll let you peruse some of those. We talk a little bit about the cost of homelessness and how it really is more affordable to be able to provide somebody with some rent geared to income housing or a rent supplement and some supports, rather than them having to go into an emergency accommodation for about $2,000 a year. If they end up in the correctional system or if they end up in our hospital, those are the monthly costs. And those are just an average cost. So really, if we look at our entire system, rent geared to income housing and rent supplements make sense. So next is basically getting to the meat of our, well, we did put in there a little bit, and I'll let you peruse them, all of the things that we have done in the last 4 years, 4.5 years up to this date. Then getting into, we did include for the public a little bit about our community improvement plan and where we are going with the next steps for that. And then looking at our housing and homelessness plan. So the first thing we wanted to do is look at some strategies. Our outcomes we talked about a little bit earlier. Our strategies are creating more housing, preserving existing stock, reducing chronic homelessness, and increasing supports. So the first one is to create more affordable housing. You'll note at the bottom of each strategy, we actually have some outcomes some targets that we've put in there. These targets are our minimums. We, right now, in order to build, especially with this strategy, in order to build affordable housing right now, we solely use provincial dollars in Grey County in order to build more affordable housing. We try and look at innovative ways, and I know we have used surplus land and whatnot, but really it is, majority of the dollars come from the province. We only know 2 years of funding right now from the province, the first and second year of this plan. We know that we are going to move forward with 54 units and with our own Sound Municipal Nonprofit and complete that 90-unit project. So this was my best guess in hoping that if we did remain with the same amount of funding over the next 3 years forward, for the total of 5, that we might be able to complete 100 units. So that is why it's in there. Is that the number that I'd love to see in there? No, but that is what I think is realistic. So that is part of the plan. The strategy is to look at what we can and what we will be doing. And I have put in a few of them, like looking at the 54 units of affordable housing, completing our 15-unit affordable housing build in Durham, looking at additional rent supplements, continuing to explore any surplus lands that we may have. And also I put in there exploring the possibility of dedicated amounts of county funding for affordable housing development. I know we have a number of priorities that we're looking at. I know we have a strategic planning session coming forward. And I think that that's probably the best time to talk about, is this something that the county wants to do moving forward? We can certainly do 100 units in the next 5 years with provincial funding. We know that's not enough. Is it something that the county wants to make as part of their priorities? And I think that's probably a conversation for that strategic day. But that's why I wanted to let you know that's where my targets are, because they are based on what's realistic with provincial funding only. So the next one that we're looking at is preserving our existing stock. Maybe not. Looking at our existing stock, we have our own 997 units. We have another 428 units that are available through our nonprofits. When the province first built housing back 30 years ago, they entered into an agreement with 9 local nonprofits that they would provide this housing. When housing was downloaded to the province and then downloaded to the municipality back in 2001, we then took over that promise to provide funding for those 9 nonprofits. Those agreements are coming to an end. Most of them are based on their end of mortgage or end of agreement. Those mortgages were 30 years ago, so that housing is starting to come up for renewal for agreement. And so we are starting to work and starting to talk with our nonprofits about what that looks like moving forward. Right now, the majority of funds that go towards subsidizing the nonprofit housing does come from our levy. So it would be us sitting down and having those conversations and continuing. Otherwise, we would hate to lose that stock of housing. That just puts us back. So that's sort of what that end of operating agreement and making those negotiations are. We have a lot of wonderful nonprofits that are coming to me with ideas that they have in order to, add another 5 units onto a property, or they've got commercial space that they want to renovate into more units. And so that is another example maybe of where some of those county-funded dollars might be able to provide some more units, even if it's in smaller parts. At least it gives opportunity. The next one on the list is looking at chronic homelessness. We are working with the hospital, Bruce County, CMHA, so Canadian Mental Health Association, Y Housing, and some other community partners at entering into a homelessness response table. So the development of this is a community response it's a multi-sector response to somebody who presents themselves as homeless. It is a by name list, so the person would be put on a list. They would be have an assessment of how they are priority-wise. Or do they have somewhere for the next 2 weeks? Do they have nowhere tonight? Is this a chronic situation? So chronic being that they have been homeless more than 6 months in the last year. And how can we put those wraparound supports for them? We're working all partners at the table to contribute some funds so that there is staff attached to this, so that there's a support worker to follow and provide that ongoing need, and so that there is somebody to actually organize this table and keep it moving. So that is something that has been working in other areas such as Winnipeg and a lot of other areas. It actually started out of veterans services, so working with people that were veterans that were homeless, and how do we reduce that. We would also like to become a Built for Zero community, meaning that we would be looking at zero chronic homelessness. We're always going to have sporadic homelessness where someone gets kicked out at 2 a.m. or someone finds themselves that their situation changed in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day. But it's that chronic homelessness, that person that is at risk, that is vulnerable, and that maybe is more of our visible homeless that we do see. Those are the people that we would be focusing the majority of our supports for. And the next one is looking at, wonderful. The next one is looking at the increase of supportive housing. And by supportive housing, we're looking at whether that's a 24-hour supportive care. That's not up to us, but that would be working with some of our partners on how can we get more supportive housing into the area. It would also look at working with Canadian Mental Health Association and Addictions to free up some of our own housing that could possibly be used for people that, again, need that assistance right away. And also working with our Indigenous partners. Right now, we're working with Minwikwidon on outreach workers, 2 Indigenous outreach workers for housing that can provide that culturally supportive and safe housing for our Indigenous people that are in need of housing in our area. So those are our 4 main areas and our targets and our strategies for the next 5 years. And I'm free to answer any questions right now.
Thank you for the presentation. I see the hands. I wonder, and maybe Barb will pipe in on this as well, when you talk about culturally appropriate housing services, are you referring specifically to Indigenous population, or is it beyond that?
So we right now have a strategy working for Indigenous, but certainly beyond that too. We know with our newcomers that are coming into the area and making sure that we have some ability to support people that are looking for housing. So certainly through newcomer and also through our Indigenous.
Thank you, Councillor Desai.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. One of the questions I had was with regards to the definition of affordable. As we heard on the rental units, the definition of affordable is the cheaper of being below the average market rent or costing 1/3 of your income. When the 1/3 of your income, does that include payment for utilities, etc., or is it strictly the rent without any of the utilities? Because most rental units that we see now on the open market anyways do not include utilities.
Anne-Marie?
So the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation's definition does include utilities. And if it was home ownership, it would also include your insurance, taxes, all of that sort of thing.
Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, County Council. Just regards to your first strategy, number one, to create affordable housing, and I know affordable housing, sometimes they call it attainable housing. People sometimes get a little funny after they say the word affordable housing, right? But you said looking at surplus county property, and you get funding to do certain. Do you think there's an opportunity, as I was speaking earlier on, to create a pilot project on pocket homes or tiny home development? Do you think there's an opportunity that we could, I know my involvement with AMO, but certainly through working at that pilot situation, that we could create something here in Grey County?
Always looking for opportunities. I think yes, we could look at, so I'm just giving an example of some of the housing that we do develop right now, if that is affordable. We would look at a mix. So we would do, there might be an apartment building. So for instance, the one in Durham that we're creating right now has market units and it has affordable units in it, right? So it's people that are paying, 70% of market rent and those that are paying 100% of market rent. And that's kind of that mix that you're looking for. When it comes to tiny homes, there's something to be said for that. I think that for myself, there would have to be dependent on where it is. If it's a plot of land that has access to services, that would be great. So the majority of the people that we build housing for would need to have transportation to a doctor, wouldn't have their own vehicle, that sort of thing. So it would also, so we'd have to look at that plot of land and where it is, but certainly always opportunity.
I have an AMO board meeting tonight and tomorrow, so I can sort of raise this idea, but I know not everybody in Grey County lives in an urban setting where they have water and sewer, so there are, places that, so I'm, looking at both, the opportunity of even the commonality type idea where there's 4 units on one piece of property, or there's the pocket development, because I think technology is there now where you could have one septic serve 4 units or one well serve 4 units. As long as it's not over 5 units, it becomes a municipal system. But you have to create that commonality thing, right? Excuse me. But all I'm saying is it's outside the box, and maybe we as Grey County could be one of those first ones to do this stuff. And excuse me, through AMO or through AMO working to try to create those opportunities, or even talking to the ministry, maybe we can create those outside the box that you're already getting funding for. So I certainly would like to take that on, or try to do something.
I certainly think that if you're looking at building that attainable housing, so for someone that's making probably over that $25,000, that may have access to a vehicle, that that group, that sort of idea of building more housing is an excellent idea, that, you know, using that land that you have in order to build more. The units that we build in all of our 900, well, not all of them, but all of our one-bedroom units are all less than 500 square feet. So, you know, we're there when it comes to building affordable housing, and most of them were built back in the 70s. So those apartments that we do have are that small. But wonderfully laid out too, some of them, some not so much because of the time that they were built in. But I think that there's lots of opportunity for design, and lots of opportunity for thinking outside the box. And especially if you're looking at that attainable housing and talking and working with developers in order to maybe take on something like that, I think there's lots of opportunity.
Well, I guess maybe I need to expand what I'm thinking is in the sense of more rural, in the sense that you have land, you can grow your garden, you have space, you have the ability to have, excuse me, certainly a 500 square foot unit and a whole bunch of units. I think there is something to be said about outside nature, all that kind of stuff, and certainly be able to grow your own food. And, you know, so that's what I'm thinking on the rural side, is those opportunities, and whether we have county lands and stuff like that, just to expand from that isolation part in the sense of in a small spot. That's where I'm thinking of too. So, thank you.
I'm looking at our Director of Planning here, and I'm not, maybe we need to have some further conversations about this outside of this table. I'm a little concerned about the provincial policy statement and whether what I'm hearing is going outside of the settlement boundaries.
Well, that's provincial policy's out for grabs right now too.
Is that Brandy?
Wide open.
Thanks for that. Yeah, with respect to current provincial policy statement in even our official plan, of course, majority of our growth and development we encourage in our settlement areas, and it goes back to what I think Anne Marie was indicating. A lot of our public services, a lot of our you know, the grocery stores and things like that, of course, are in our settlement areas, and for people to be able to access those, and we're not creating then a transportation barrier by putting, for example, more affordable housing or tiny homes out in the rural area, because we hear both time and time again the two biggest challenges and barriers to get access to either jobs or for access to food and other things is housing and transportation, and the two go hand in hand. So the concern is that if we start looking more, and maybe there's opportunity within close proximity to the settlement area around rural areas, but if we further extend that out to other areas, there's we get maybe into isolation factors and being able not be able to access some of those public service and other facilities that we have in our urban areas. So that's just a consideration that we need to, I think, you know, as we're looking at out of the box ideas or other ideas in terms of trying to create more affordable and attainable housing in our area, we just need to be cognizant of some of those challenges that may be created that we may not want to create.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Desai and then Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I'm still unclear through you to Anne Marie. I'm still unclear on end of operating or end of mortgage agreements. And the other thing that I'd like a little more expansion on is the difference between affordable housing and supportive housing.
So starting with end of operating agreements, so we have agreements with our nonprofits in which we provide a subsidy to them. That subsidy is their mortgage, their insurance, administration costs, taxes, and then they take the money that they make from rent and they put that into the pot too, and then that hopefully pays all of the bills. And the reason we do that is because the rents are a lower level. So they might be able to normally get $900 and somebody might only be paying $300. So that's where we're subsidizing that money. That agreement comes to an end at the end of mortgage, which in the next, I think, 7 years, all of ours come to an end. So at that point, the province is still kind of working out what that's going to look like. At one time, it was thought that those units could leave, which would leave a big hole. That would be 428 units that would be leaving Grey County. Now I think the province is putting in some legislation that says, you know, these are public subsidized housing, and that there should not be an ability for that to end. But what that does leave us is to have to negotiate another agreement with them in order to sustain that housing. So maybe that mortgage cost is going to be gone now, but we know that they probably are going to need some capital needs within the next 10 years. So what does that look like? So we just wanted to let council know that that's something we're going to be working on in the next 5 years, is setting some examples and looking into what's the best way for us to continue to, number one, keep that housing available, keep it safe, affordable, subsidized, and sustainable. That's all that is. Affordable versus supportive. So supportive housing comes in a lot of different ways. For instance, Canadian Mental Health Association receives funding from the LHIN in order to provide housing in which someone may have 24-hour supports. They may have, an hour a day. They could have an hour a week, just to help them maintain their housing and ensure that they can remain living on their own. So that is something that we need more of. And we also recognize that with our homelessness response table, we are going to create situations in which if we are going to house somebody, that person's going to need supports. So that's where we're looking at working with all of our community partners to see how we can provide both of those. So not just housing, which we do, but also the supports. So we're not actually becoming supportive housing, but we would be maybe being able to provide some funds and look at some creative ways to create the supports that are out there for people that live with us. Okay.
Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I guess three things I was wondering about is you talked about the waiting list. Are people allowed to be on more than one waiting list throughout the province? And does that skew our numbers somehow? The other thing I was wondering about is I know in the past in different developments that the county runs or communities, we had a presence in one of the units where people could go for help, questions, whatever. Do we still do that? I think it was a great idea at the time and still is. And the other is, given the constraints on building and construction timelines, expenses, and all the rest of it, have we considered actually going into the housing market and buying housing that's already, in place? That, there's lots of challenges with that as well, but is that an option?
Okay, so wait list, yes, you can put your name on every wait list in the province if you wish, and it does kind of skew it a little bit, especially between Grey and Bruce counties. Our people sometimes don't see the border lines if they're living in Chesley and then they move to Elmwood or that sort of thing. Well, if they're in Elmwood, they could be in Grey or Bruce anyways, but yes, so that sometimes does happen, and again, that's another reason that makes it a little bit more difficult to figure out who exactly needs housing. So that's why we kind of look at people that live in Grey County and go from that, because that gives us a better idea. The next is help. We have actually increased the amount of supports that we have in our buildings, whether it's ourselves or whether it is an outside source coming in. We have family resource centers. We have Canadian Mental Health Association has a worker that goes around to all of our buildings to help with development, community development within our area or in that building, brings in supports. We have community relations workers. So we have still probably just under 50% of the people that live with us are seniors. So we do provide VON in our buildings. So there's quite a bit of support, always room for more, and there's always a need for different services, right? So we try and keep up on that, but again, it's a capacity and a funding and everything else sort of idea. But we're always working diligently to make sure that those supports are there. The other thing, certainly buying housing, and are you thinking the possibility that we buy a house and make it into 4 apartments or whatever that might look like? With the provincial dollars that we have, that's not something that we've ever gotten into. But moving forward, what is the county's role? That's certainly something, if the county is looking at getting into some of the housing business, we have a lot of properties that we no longer pay mortgages on, so there's the ability to probably mortgage against it if we wanted to. There's a ton of opportunity. We just haven't explored that yet, and that's sort of what I'm asking at this council as to what extent do you want to be involved in? Do we want to get involved in housing?
Councillor Keaveney.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and thank you, Anne Marie. And just a question, if I may, going back earlier in your presentation to income geared to rent, and recognizing that people who are in the workforce can work a minimum number of hours and still pay, the minimum rent. But thinking that, obviously we're in a real struggle for workforce. Every business is looking for staff. And I just wondered if there's been any discussion in relation to that, to the minimum number of hours that people can work, and how can we encourage those people to get, full-time into a workforce and eventually be able to pay, a full rent. But right now their hands are kind of tied because they're, they work those minimum hours, they get, the subsidized rent, and how do we help them kind of find their way into a full-time workforce, and again, to help all those businesses that are looking for people.
So the way that our subsidy is set up, it is set up for people that have fluctuating work. If you were a single person, minimum wage, working full-time, you would still qualify for our housing. So you could be working full-time and still live with us. We have a number of single parents that work full-time and obviously still need our housing, because even working full-time at minimum wage at $14 an hour, $15 an hour, they're not making enough that they can afford a $1,200 a month rental. So we do encourage, and we do, there is really no penalty to working full-time and living with us. So.
Okay, I think we're ready to call the question. It appears. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much, Anne Marie. Move on to item 7B, capital purchase of tandem trucks. I'm looking for a mover to put the item on the floor. So moved by Councillor Milne, seconded by Councillor Hutchinson. And Pat, you have the floor.
As many of you probably know, this is a report we take quite frequently, just to give us a heads up because of delays in approving the budget, to let us get a head start on getting our equipment. This one in particular is for 2 tandem trucks, and we've taken this similar report quite a few years. We're allowed to procure, with your permission of course, up to 50% of gross expenditures before the budget is approved. These 2 tandem trucks, they usually take somewhere between 7 to 9 months from date of purchase. So we like to get them out, like to do it before Christmas if we could, and get them ordered and basically get in the queue. So kind of the way it works, we put the truck out to tender, we get a various number of bids, we have to make sure they meet all our specs, and then they go to Viking to get near Mount Forest to get additional equipment and stuff on them. So it can take quite a while. The last ones from last year we haven't received yet. We're anticipating receiving them in November. I think we didn't order them. By the time this report went through and we did the tender and we did the award, which goes through this council as well, I think we ordered them about early February, and we're expecting them in November. So we're kind of getting a little quicker start on this one. Just a little bit of background. A few years ago, originally we had always used carbon steel dump bodies. So at this committee, or I guess the transportation committee at the time, at their suggestion, we tried a stainless steel box and an aluminum box. We've had a lot of luck with the stainless steel box. The aluminum box has been holding up, but some other municipalities have had issues. It's a little too light for some of our operators. But the stainless steel, we really find it saves us from painting it halfway through and doing kind of rust repairs, and we've really been happy with the stainless steel box. So that's what we're recommending in this case. And just for interest, it's about, I think the stainless steel box is about 10 grand more than a carbon steel box. So That being said, we've only got enough that we've never actually sold one used. Like, we're anticipating that probably when we go to turn them over, you know, on Gov deals, we'll probably get a better deal because they just look newer. So this is just a report to approve $612,000 that we can go to tender with for these two tandem trucks.
Any questions? Oh, Councillor Soever.
Yes, I'm just wondering, how many kilometers do we typically get out of a truck? Like before we go to get a new one?
I always get stumped by a technical question from this committee, but I'm not sure exactly kilometers. We go by years. We have a 12-year cycle. That being said, everyone isn't, you know, cast in stone 12 years. Usually at the fleet meeting, we kind of go over the life maintenance cycle of a truck, and there'll be one that's, you know, kind of a lemon and one that isn't. And not that, you know, we're offering up lemons to everybody that we get rid of, but because they're still good too. But but usually we go by years, so it's about 12 years. So I could look. I'll get back to you on that. How many kilometers we end up doing over those 12 years, but.
Resist. Sorry, I took over there. I was going to say to Councillor Desai that he should resist.
I just found out you can't hit the button and have two mics going at the same time.
All right, Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and thank you for the report. Two things. Is there such a thing as galvanized? Because I know you can buy trailers that are either painted or galvanized, but do they make galvanized box?
Councillor McQueen, I'm just going to ask you to push your button.
Well, you're always pushing my buttons, Mr. Warden. I don't know. I thought it was on. Okay. The other question is you do have a practice of offering your used trucks to the lower tiers. So we have purchased equipment from the county. We're quite happy with that cat grader. That's still moving along. So it's working out well. I just saw lightning over there.
Am I ready to call the question? All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you. And you're going to stay there, or is Matt going to take over? You'll stay, okay. So looking at item 7C, also a capital purchase prior to budget approval. I'm looking for a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Burley, seconded by Councillor Keaveney. You have the floor.
This is a similar type of report. This is a capital job. We go over our 10-year capital and we kind of evaluate what is the one job that, it's usually our biggest job, that we really needs to go. You know, we want it to go early. Contractors are typically, although it's hard to quantify the exact, you know, our savings that we're getting, but we find our early in the year tender, like usually for tender in January, right after the new year, we seem to get very good prices on a big job early because, you know, every contractor is looking for a job that will pay his bills for the whole year, you know, and then, so we kind of, in this case, it's Grey Road 9. We feel it's you know, in a rough state, and we really want Grey Road 9 to go. So that's why we picked this project to go first. And then we'll usually save one as well till the end, like usually an overlay or something, because it's just, you never know exactly what construction prices you're going to get. You don't know how busy the contractors are. You don't know if they've got jobs tied up from the year before. You don't know what the price of asphalt cement's going to be. So we always kind of save maybe a little one, usually an easier one to do at the end, because, you know, I always kind of say our budget is a bit like the Price is Right. You want to get as close as you can, but you really don't want to go over. So that's kind of where we're at. So this is the first one we'd like to put out. It's an 8-kilometer job, so it's about $3 million. And it'll have paved shoulders. It's from Grey Road 109 to Grey Road 23. So there's a map on page 28. So we'd like to tender it fairly early, probably early in the new year. So we're looking for permission to do that before the budget's approved.
Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So this is going to be a grind and pave deal? pulverized. Typically, how far down into the roadbed do they go to repair? The reason I ask is the holes in that road are so deep and so formidable that you're going to have to go down quite a bit to fix that road, although I'm happy to hear that you are going to fix it.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Warden. Typically, we will pulverize about the same amount of granular material as we do asphalt. So if there's 100 mils of asphalt, we'll do 100 mils of granular as well. So there would be, 100 mils or 200 mils pulverized, and then we'd put another 100 on top of it. So that's where we feel it kind of mixes it up enough to give us a solid, or help with our base.
Excellent.
I don't see it. Oh, Councillor Desai.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. One of the questions I had, and I sent this to staff earlier, was what percentage of savings we would see on this project because we're going out earlier on it. And that was answered satisfactorily. What my question is, and maybe this is more of a policy question that we should look at as council, is why can staff...
Completely my fault, I apologize. No.
I resisted when you said this.
No disrespect intended whatsoever.
So, my question is, we do a capital forecast going 10 years ahead. So why can we not allow staff to tender out all the capital projects beforehand if we do get a significant amount of savings by doing that?
Kevin's got something to say on this.
You got a lot of staff really excited. It just, there is so many budgetary impacts that come upon it, and that we've felt this way, and that's why the purchasing policy reads 50% only, that we would hate to have all this tendered out and commit council to something, and then we bring all these other budget pressures to you, and then you just feel, well, what do I do now? And so that's why we went with a 50% threshold, that they would come through here, and you got this opportunity to say yes or no. And as well, when they come back for award and you see how they've come in price-wise, again, the council has that authority to say, no, we're not going for that at this point in time, and because of budget pressures and stuff. So,
Okay, I think we're ready to call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? That is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Pat. Next, item 7D, dealing with housekeeping amendments to our official plan. Randy's on deck. I'm looking for a mover to put the item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Boddy, seconded by Councillor Bartnicki. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. So the new county official plan was approved by the province in June of this year and came into effect on June 7th, 2019. Since that time, staff have identified some discrepancies that need to be amended in the approved plan. This is a normal course of action following a new official plan, as there are bound to be errors in a large document. Some of the proposed housekeeping amendments would include incorporating some of the official plan amendments that were previously adopted by council that were not incorporated into the final document prior to the province's approval of the official plan, and were inadvertently repealed when the new official plan was approved by the province. Examples of the official plan amendments that were previously adopted can be found on page 2 of the report. One of the official plan amendments is somewhat time sensitive. It's the Gibraltar Pit official plan amendment number 135. And it's time sensitive in order for the LPAT to make a decision with respect to the town official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment that's currently before the LPAT. The proponent has asked that OPA 135 be altered slightly, which would reduce the amount of lands to be designated for extraction. The other official plan amendments are less time sensitive, as they do not fall into the same nuance based on the changes to the Planning Act and the LPAT Act that the Gibraltar Pit does. In addition to incorporating the previously adopted official plan amendments, the new OP, we've identified a couple other areas that we would like to clean up. One is fixing a mapping error on lands located southeast of the settlement area of Walters Falls. They were inadvertently designated as secondary settlement area and should have been designated as rural. Designating lands as space extensive commercial industrial that have been designated as rural employment lands in Blue Mountains and scope to those permitted uses in the town's official plan. Clarifying that lot creation within settlement areas is permitted, subject to an environmental impact study for new lots proposed within the linkage, and that's the linkage mapping that was created as part of the Natural Heritage Systems mapping. And clarifying Table 8, which is dealing with on-farm diversified uses and the criteria as it relates to that, to say that on-farm diversified uses can be created on non-farm uses. A bit of an oxymoron there. We just want to clarify that that's what our intent is, as well as clarifying the apparent conflict in one of the sections, section 5226 and 5227, as it pertains to non-farm size lot creation. And this is we have a policy that says non-farm lot creation within area resource areas is not permitted. And then one section which relates to criteria that could be considered for that. So we have to clarify those two policies. Once directed by council, staff will finalize this housekeeping amendment. We'll post on the county website for review and comment. A public meeting would be scheduled for later this fall, and we would advertise that in local newspapers and circulate that to previously requested, those who previously requested notice of decision for those official plan amendments. And then following the public meeting, staff will bring forward a report recommending a proposed official plan amendment for council's consideration. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you. I was going to say, I hope no one left their window down or even cracked by the sounds of things. Are there any questions, comments? Seeing none, then I will call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much, Randy. And you're up next as well on item 7E, moving to Southgate, I believe, right? Flato? Looking for somebody to put this item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Carlton, seconded by Councillor Gamble. Thank you. I get hit every meeting with somebody. My apologies.
Thank you again. County has received a request to extend draft approval for a plan of subdivision known as Flato East, which is located in the township of Southgate in the village of Dundalk. And the request is for a period of 5 years. Flato East received draft approval in November 2016 and has been revised on a couple of occasions since then. The proposed subdivision, as I mentioned, is located in the village of Dundalk. It's basically in the southeast corner of the village, adjacent to the Provincial Highway. The current draft approved plan consists of a total of 500 residential lots, which includes 310 singles and 190 townhouse dwellings. It's part of an overall plan development that consists of 3 plans of subdivision known as Flato West, Flato East, and Flato North. A total of 933 residential units being proposed by the same developer as part of those 3 subdivisions. Flato West has been given final approval and consisted of 70 units. Those have all been built. Phases of Flato East and Flato North have also been given final approval, and a total of 71 permits have been issued to date for those 2 plans, and 10 permits to be issued in the next few weeks. Phases 4, 5, and 6 of Flato North are also getting close to final approval. There have been approximately 70 permits issued per year for the Flato developments, and if that absorption rate continues, the remaining phases of Flato will take approximately 10 years. The applicant also notes that the township is undertaking servicing improvements, which will allow some of the later phases of the development to proceed. So based on those reasons, they're requesting a 5-year extension. Typically, we see 3-year extensions or less being requested, but based on the circumstances of this being part of a larger development, that's the reasons for requesting a 5-year. We have also added criteria in our new official plan when considering draft approval extensions. And the policy notes that the draft plan has to meet 4 of those 10 criteria. I've noted those in the report. I'm not going to go through those in detail, but I just wanted to highlight that we have other considerations when we're considering these extensions before considering whether or not they should be extended or not. For this particular development, they meet 8 of those 10 conditions. The requirement is at least 4 of those 10 conditions, so they well exceed what our policies would consider. Based on that, we're recommending that, given that the Township of Southgate has supported the 5-year extension, we're recommending that council support that as well.
Thank you, Randy. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Thank you. And we're moving on now to 7F. And Kim, you're on deck. We're talking about the Strategic Planning Day Overview. Councillor Desai moves, seconded by Councillor O'Leary. Kim?
Thank you, Mr. Wharton. Thank you, and with your permission, I'll remain in my seat. This report was really just to give Council a bit of a heads up with regard to the strategic planning session that we've got planned for October the 15th, which is the day after Thanksgiving. So I will, hopefully everyone can put that in their calendar and don't, after a holiday, go on to other things. We would, staff and I, are really looking forward to the opportunity to sit down with you and really have a review of where we are and how it is that council would like to move forward with setting priorities. What I've drafted here, what I'm proposing, is that we put another 5-year plan in place. I know some municipalities do take on a 10-year strategic planning cycle. And I'm open to that discussion if you would like to do something that is more detailed on a 5-year basis and then looking more into the future. It just gets quite challenging, I think, to try and do anything to a high degree of detail, anything beyond that initial 5-year period. The report that's before you outlines kind of the draft agenda for the day, our current strategic plan, talks to vision, purpose, and values. I'd just like to reconfirm those with all of you, and then take a bit of time at the front end of the day to just do a kind of a high-level environmental scan. Where are we financially? What's our financial outlook? What are the things that are impacting the county's current financial position, and what do we anticipate that looking like in the future? So some socioeconomic factors, many of which you've heard a little bit about today. Some of the provincial direction and where they